Hello, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Amanda Jaffe, and I'm a current student at the Harvard Kennedy School. Before we begin, the Ash Center and the Institute of Politics would like to acknowledge the land on which Harvard sits as the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people and a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. I want to take this opportunity to let the Harvard community members and everyone joining us today know about the Harvard Votes Challenge, a nonpartisan initiative striving to build a civic culture here at Harvard by increasing voter registration and participation across the entire community. Today is National Voter Registration Day, so we have some specific calls to action for everyone participating in this event that is eligible to vote in the upcoming United States election. First, please register to vote or check your voter registration. You can do this through the TurboVote link that has been posted in the chat. Second, please make a plan to vote. Will you vote by mail? Will you vote early in person or on election day? What deadlines do you need to be aware of? We encourage everyone today to make a voting plan, add it to your calendar, tell a friend, and encourage them to make a plan as well. As part of your voting plan, we encourage you to pledge that you will vote through the link posted in this chat. This pledge form includes helpful information and links to support you in accomplishing your voting plan. We would also like to remind all participants that the deadline to submit your 2020 census response is next Wednesday, September 30th. Make sure you are counted while you are making sure your vote is counted this November. The link has also been posted in the chat. We invite all participants to join the movement at voteschallenge.harvard.edu. Finally, this event is being recorded and can be found on the Ash Center website and on the Ash Center YouTube channel after the event has concluded. I would now like to give the floor to Professor David Wilkins, the Lester Kissel Professor of Law and Vice Dean for Global Initiatives on the Legal Profession. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda. I think those of you on this webinar have already seen what makes Harvard so special, and it's not the faculty, it's amazing students like Amanda and the energy that she brings. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this important webinar on this important day, but I'm particularly grateful because I have the opportunity to actually see one of my oldest and dearest friends in the world, who I've known literally since before we were born, and whose career and whose commitment to public service I have admired for so long. And I can't think of anybody better to help us to begin a conversation about why this day is so important and why voting is so important than my dear friend, Valerie Jarrett. I won't go through her full biography and all her accomplishments because we would have no time to talk about anything else. You all know that she was a senior advisor to President Obama, and that term really understates her importance. She was really the most important advisor to President Obama. But that just was the culmination, or I shouldn't say culmination because she's still doing amazing things, but that came after a long career of public service in which she has really dedicated herself to the goals of our public discourse and our public process. And really, that's, Valerie, where I'd love to start today. Where did that love of public service and that commitment to our democratic process come from? Oh, Valerie, you're on mute. This is the danger of
I know. And I just jumped right in. So I'll start again. Good afternoon, everyone. David, it's wonderful to see you as always. Amanda, thank you for your leadership and putting the spotlight on an issue that is so important to all of us, I hope. So my career in the public sector began 6 years after law school. I had made a 10-year plan for myself when I was coming out of college to go right to law school, discover my passion about the practice of law, find a good law firm, fall in love, get married, have a baby, and live happily ever after. And 10 years into it, I was pretty miserable at my law firm. And as you know, David, I was the first lawyer in my family, unlike your family. And so they were very proud of me and thought that what I was doing was just perfect. And yet I was unhappy. And I had a very good friend who also went to Harvard, who you know, Elvin Charity. And he had left his law firm and joined local government, working for Mayor Harold Washington, who was the first Black mayor of Chicago. And he was heading back after the mayor's reelection to his second term to his firm. And he said to me, why don't you consider public service? You'll feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself. And there was something about that phrase that resonated with me. And I will say, quite honestly, after having had a child and leaving her every day to go to work and doing something that I did not feel was fulfilling, made me question whether she would actually be proud of me when she grew up. And I wanted that more than anything. And so I took this leap of faith and I joined local government in Chicago, and it changed my life forever. And it was in local government in Chicago where I learned a few really important lessons. I learned to listen. And when you're working in local government, oh my gosh, your constituents are proximate to you. They are right in your face. They are at Mr. G's, David, in the grocery store. They're at the dry cleaner. They're in the park when you're trying to play with your daughter. And it's 24/7, as it should be, because that's what public service is all about. And you have to learn to go into situations where people are furious with you, not necessarily because of anything you did, but for what you stand for, because of how they've been treated long before you arrived on the scene. And your job is to earn their trust and respect. And so those lessons that I learned in local government in Chicago were invaluable to me during the 8 years I served in the White House.
So Valerie, you took another leap of faith, which serving in the White House was, of course, the culmination of, but you had no idea when you took that leap of faith. You had been a very high level senior appointed official, but you moved to really participate directly in the electoral process. And I wonder what motivated that decision. I know it was because there was an extraordinary candidate who you knew well and knew his even more extraordinary wife, who we both love dearly. But it was also something about getting involved in the electoral process. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about that.
Well, sure. So I think, David, you and I were both fortunate to be raised by parents who believed in civic engagement, who understood the importance of not just accepting things as they are, but fighting to make things better, and who encouraged us to do the same and to find our path forward. And I think part of why, I mean, look, I've now known the Obamas, it'll be 30 years next year, before they were married, before he was even involved in politics. And having worked on all of his campaigns since he ran for state Senate, it just seemed perfectly natural when he was running for president to get more involved. Now, I will say my parents thought I was crazy because at the time I was the CEO of a real estate development and management company here in Chicago. And I kept spending more and more time on the road. And they were like, what are you doing? And I said, I think this guy's got something, and I think it's going to resonate around the country. And again, what an extraordinary experience it was to travel our great country from coast to coast and really listen to the American people and what they were looking for from their leader. And it was just a phenomenal experience. And I wouldn't have traded those days on the campaign trail for anything, and helped prepare me for what he wanted to do once he was elected.
And Valerie, after that extraordinary experience and after your extraordinary time as a senior leader in some of the most important events of our time, since leaving the White House, you've also taken yet another kind of leap into our democratic process to really think seriously about how we get more people voting, particularly young people. And you are now the chair of the board of When We All Vote. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about that journey for you and what you're doing now to try to energize our democratic process.
Yes, well, first my prop. So here we go. You can order this online. I did. We also are going to have some that say When We All Vote, but I didn't want to wait until they came out. So vote. And so why vote? So after the last election, I think Michelle and Obama and I did a lot of kind of soul searching, trying to figure out what happened. And looked at a lot of data about the election returns. And I think the number that really jumped out at us was that nearly 100 million eligible Americans did not vote. That's a big number. In a country that depends upon a democracy, which requires civic engagement and participation, the most fundamental level, which is voting. And so we thought, well, what could we do to change the culture and not make it about any one election or one candidate, but truly try to meet people where they are and educate them about the importance of exercising this vote, and to not focus on just the presidential race, because having met in local government, we both appreciated the impact that the local mayor has on your life, or the prosecutor, or the governor, or the county board, Congress, checks and balances that should be provided. And so we thought, well, let's create a nonpartisan 501c3 organization its mission is to truly change the culture around voting and to go after particularly young people and people of color. Young people, because two factors. One, they do not vote in disproportionately high numbers. And number two, if they do vote in their first election, the likelihood of them becoming lifelong voters goes up. So it's like the perfect place to go. And the people who have the most to lose or most to win by the election as well. And then also to go and try to help as many people of color register. And that is because in the history of our country, particularly Black people have been disenfranchised so often. And so those are really the two cohorts that we've spent a lot of time going after. And it's now an organization that's 2 years old. We've had some fun time, everything from couch parties with DJ D Nice, the DJ who was out last night on the award ceremony, to a comedy show that ABC produced last week. Coming up in October, The West Wing. Those of you who watched reruns, well, they haven't been together as a cast since the last show went off the air, and they're doing a new episode of West Wing dedicated to voting. And we are working with high school students, colleges and universities, mayors across our country, everyone, business community, trying to get businesses to give people, their workers, time off to go work and encourage them to ask those who they have influence over to do the same, so that as many people as can possibly turn out in the elections that are going on now and in the future, and trying to get people to understand the nexus between the issues they care about and politics. And it's hard in this toxic environment that we're in, but that's our goal.
So Valerie, I'll just say one of the biggest thrills of my life was when I came to visit you in the West Wing and you showed me all the places where they had filmed on TV and whatnot. Valerie, you know, this organization is so important. But I'm going to end with a question, and I'm saying this for folks who may want to ask you a question. What a marvelous opportunity. If they could put it in the Q&A, we'll try to get to as many as we can. But what is your message to the young people who are listening about what they themselves can do in this effort? Obviously, they themselves could vote. That's the number one thing. But what else can they do to try to participate in what is so critical for our country?
Well, so much. So first of all, I would suggest that you all go on whenweallvote.org. That's our website. If you want to volunteer, that would be terrific. And today is National Voter Registration Day. So today, please, make sure that you are registered to vote. And once you're sure you're registered, make a plan for how you're going to vote. We're obviously in the middle of a global pandemic. It does affect our ability to keep ourselves safe. And so figure out what's going to be your strategy. If you're going to vote by mail, request your ballot right now and send it right back. We know that our postal service is going to be deluged with mail since so many people will be voting by mail. So get your ballot in early. If you decide you want to vote in person, I encourage you to vote early so that you don't get caught up in what we saw in the primary elections with these long lines with people having to choose between their safety and their ability to exercise that vote. And then talk to all your friends, form voting squads. Volunteer to be a poll watcher. Many of our poll watchers in our country are elderly and are hesitant to go out as they should be and participate this time around. And so be a poll watcher. We're trying to get 250,000 more poll watchers around the country. Election protection, very important. Those of you who are in law school, we would love to have more law students helping with voter protection because we're anticipating that there's going to be a lot of shenanigans going on in this election. And so whatever it is that you feel passionate about, participate. And the other thing, David, I'd say before we turn it over to questions is that I think in what has been a horrendously painful year for so many of us between the COVID-19, the racial unrest that we've seen across our country, I am optimistic. The fact that we've had mostly peaceful demonstrations in all 50 states, people of all ages, races, backgrounds, who've come forward and said Black Lives Matter, and they want to make our system and our policies and our practices more fair. That's terrific. And it gives me hope. And we've already seen changes where some cities and states have changed their laws based on the pressure that has come from the people. But we also have to vote. And it isn't an option to opt out. And so in a sense, this has been a civics lesson. People now understand, oh, the mayor appoints the police superintendent. The city council confirms that person. Oh, the prosecutors have discretion about who they bring cases against. The governors oversee public health oftentimes together with the mayors. And we've seen the disparity of health outcomes around the country. All levels of government affect both our lives and our livelihood. And so if you look at what's happened this past year, I would say, ask yourself, who are the people that share your values, who share your priorities, who you think are going to look out for you and those you love, and then get out there up and down the ballot at every single possible place and vote. And why would you let anybody take that away from you? And we often say, Mrs. Obama, one of her favorite lines when she's talking to young people is, look, would you let your grandparents pick out your clothes? No, you wouldn't let them pick out your clothes. Why are you going to let them decide who your elected officials should be? Because let me tell you, senior citizens do tend to vote. So we want young people to make sure their voices are heard as well.
The only thing about that line from Michelle is that if Michelle were your grandparent, you'd love her to pick out your clothes.
Well, that's true. That is a good exception to my overall.
There are exceptions to every rule. Listen, Valerie, we've got a few questions. I'm going to start with one from Shani Ullman, who asks a really good question, which is, what's the strategy for Gen Zs who don't watch television and who are not on traditional media? What's the strategy of reaching those youngest voters?
Well, we are very active on social media. And you're right, I probably should have mentioned that too, given the fact that many of you probably don't look at television. But our goal is to meet people where they are, wherever they are. After this, I'm doing an event with Chris Paul, who's head of the NBA basketball union, and is one of the co-chairs of When We All Vote. And athletes have gotten extremely involved, both in social justice, but also in voting this year. We have a whole array of co-chairs that work together with us, people who we think are influential with Gen Z and younger voters. And so we're asking them to use their platforms, use their voices to reach people where they are. Michelle Obama is doing Instagram Live today, encouraging people to get actively involved. So if you look at social media, we're everywhere on there, and as an organization, but also importantly, these individual people who we know have great sway. And if you all have suggestions, please send them our way, because you're a lot closer to that generation than I am. So we are always open for new and exciting ways of getting them engaged. And I will say, I did a call earlier last week with about 3,000 high school students. And in each of their high schools, in the midst of the pandemic, when they're all going to school distantly, doing remote learning, they're figuring out ways of getting their classmates registered. So there's a lot of creativity out there that we're calling upon right now. This isn't at all the plan that we had a year ago, but that just goes to show you how flexible you have to be and figure out how to meet people where they are when they are remote.
That is so true. Here's another question from Troy McDonald. He's a master's student here at Harvard. And he said, how are you working? He's from Wisconsin. And he said, how is your organization working? You mentioned local elected officials, local mayors, local communities. How do you engage the local officials in a nonpartisan way in the Get Out the Vote campaign?
So a lot of our nation's mayors are very involved in voter registration and have been for a while. So I went and spoke at the US Conference of Mayors now twice over the last several months. When I say went, I mean I went on my video screen and did it. And before that, it was in person in Washington. And I met with some of the mayors to share best practices for steps that they can take. And they had all kinds of creative ways. And so I think we are leaning on local leaders to tell us who are the organizations in their community who are most impactful, and to help connect us with the leaders on the ground so that we can make sure, again, that we're meeting people where they are. So local elected officials have been important, and there are many national organizations that also really work on grassroots efforts to get out the vote. And so we are partnering with everyone we can possibly think of.
So we've got a great question from Annabella Morabito, I think, is I'm pronouncing correctly, I hope, who's a master's student also in a higher ed program here. And she says, what do you think the obligations are of higher education institutions, or what can higher education institutions do to help, besides holding a great webinar where we invite the most amazing person in the world to come talk to us, but what else would you like to see Harvard or schools of education or other schools do?
Well, right on campus, to the degree you can have voter registration on your campus, convene not just the students, but the faculty, the staff, the administrators. Make sure that you're encouraging everybody to make that plan that they need in order to vote. I mean, one of the reasons oftentimes college students don't vote is, something comes up that day. Well, that's why you need a plan. And that's why my plan that I would encourage you to adopt involves not voting on the actual election day, because things come up. They inevitably do. You'll have an exam, you'll stayed up too late the night before, you just forget because you're busy. And so make it top of mind. And I think what we're asking colleges and universities around the country to do is to help their students and their community develop that plan and heighten their awareness through conversations such as this about why voting is so important.
That is, making a plan is so important, particularly in this year where there's so many uncertainties.
Exactly.
Another attendee who's anonymous asked another question. I think a lot of those young people, perhaps in a state like Massachusetts or other states, which perhaps are not considered swing states, what can they do in terms of those states where perhaps elections are more contested? This is obviously for the presidential election, but is there any advice for those voters who want to make a difference outside of their own state?
Yeah, so a couple things. So first of all, still vote. Even if you're in a traditional red state or a blue state and you think, well, what difference does my vote make? It actually does make a difference, because whoever is elected, particularly in this kind of a toxic environment we're in, I think it's important that they have a mandate. There have been all kinds of questions about the integrity of the election. And so you really want to make sure that you're sending a strong message. And so for that, every individual vote counts. In terms of influencing the outcome in the Electoral College, well, we know it boils down to a handful of very important states, from Florida to Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan. And so there are phone banks available for you to call into those states right now. If you have a candidate who you prefer to work for, go on their website and they will help you determine how you can make those phone calls. I know when President Obama ran for office, David and many others, we all went to Iowa and knocked on doors and tried to rally the troops that way. That's not going to be so possible this time, but you can get on the telephone and send a text to anyone. So if you have friends in those states, text your friends. They might be thinking about it, but there's nothing like a nudge from someone they know to encourage them to do the right thing.
So Valerie, we've got several questions, and I'm not at all surprised about this, that are asking you to reflect a little bit on the death of the great Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who I know you knew well and who I was fortunate enough to know a little bit myself, and went to law school with her daughter. But for this purpose, how is this perhaps going to shape the way in which people think about voter turnout, particularly for for women. And because, again, in a nonpartisan way, women's issues are always very important in an election. And it's very important that women be motivated to vote. So if you could say a few words about that.
Sure. So, as I'm sure have you, David, I have watched Justice Ginsburg's career since I was a young lawyer 35 years ago when she was working for the ACLU and fighting against discrimination of women in the workplace and being an advocate. She has been an extraordinary, iconic figure that has devoted her entire life to equity and justice. And I found some of my best days during those years in the White House was when I had an opportunity to go and listen to oral arguments. And whether it was the Affordable Care Act twice, or marriage equality, the reversal of DOMA, every single time she was just masterful. And one of her skills, I thought, was that she did not look at law to be interpreted in a vacuum from on high. She believed that law had to be interpreted through the prism of the effect it was going to have on the lives of people who would be touched by those laws and on by our society. And some of her strongest clarion calls, I think, were her dissents. And one in particular that I would mention, because I think it's kind of a civics lesson into itself, was the case of Lilly Ledbetter. Lilly Ledbetter had worked for decades and didn't receive equal pay to her male counterparts, but didn't know about it. And one day she was slipped a note by a male colleague who said, I make more money than you and we do the same job. So she brought a lawsuit, but unfortunately the statute of limitations had expired by then. But of course she had no idea she'd been discriminated against. And so her case went all the way to the Supreme Court. Justice Ginsburg disagreed with the majority that said that the statute had lapsed and therefore she had no standing. And but in her dissent, she said Congress should fix this wrong. It's not fair that a woman who doesn't know that she's suffering from discrimination then doesn't get to bring the suit, because many times employers penalize their workers for sharing compensation. And don't you know, the very first bill that President Obama signed was the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act that tolls the statute of limitations until you're aware you're being discriminated against. So even through her dissent, she was able to send an important message that would level that playing field. And I think that we mourn her best by continuing her fight for equality and justice. And there's something each of us can do. And you know, she's a force of nature. For her to have battled cancer time and time and time again, and exercised into her 80s and never lost sight of how important her voice was, there's something that each of us can take from that. And that's how I think we honor her best. There's still a lot of work to do on equality. And I think that that what we're seeing right now in terms of replacing her so close to an election is going to add to the anxiety of the moment. I think that this election, is the presidential election, will turn on turnout. And the question will be who has the greatest amount of energy in their party. And the choice is very clear. It's not like in some elections where perhaps the choice isn't that clear. And so the energy that that exists within more energy within one party or the other is going to, I think, determine the outcome. And women are half our population. So we have a lot to say about who gets elected, again, not just in the president's race, but in all of the races.
Well, Valerie, I could talk to you forever, and I know that our audience could too, but we know how busy you are, and we are so appreciative of you taking this time to share this important message. I'll just say that I know how proud Justice Ginsburg was of you and of the role that you have played and how you have exemplified the highest ideals of what she fought her life for. And we are so honored that you took this time to be with us and to really remind us of just how important it is that each of us fulfill this basic fundamental duty of democracy that we owe to each other. I want to thank the Ash Center and the Institute of Politics of the Harvard Vote Challenge for putting on this amazing event, and for all they're doing to try to fulfill the goals that you have set for us. I can't imagine a better way to celebrate this day than this conversation, with the possible, actually the only exception, that I wish you were here in person so that we could follow it up by having dinner together. But one day, as the pandemic passes, I hope we'll be able to do that. Thank you very, very much. And I will send people again to the website for when we all vote, how you can get involved, and how you can make sure that your voice and everyone's voice is heard.
Thank you so much. Stay safe, everybody. David, be well. See you and Anne Marie soon, I hope.
I hope so too. Take care. Love for everybody. Bye-bye. Are you guys still here?